Please welcome Annette Benning and director Michael Mayer, please.
These are really footlights. These are the old-fashioned footlights.
I can't tell, is this flattering lighting or unflattering lighting?
I think it's maybe like the old style footlights. I think
get on mic, you too.
Oh yeah,
Use the mic.
Oh,
yeah.
So, so Annette, you've played this part, I read, when you were in your 20s?
Yes, when I was in acting school, I got to play this part. These are the kinds of plays that we work on when we're in acting school because there's such great writing. And so, yes, I played this part when I was 22 or 23.
And when you look back on that experience now, do you just feel like, oh my God, there are so many things that I understand as a person who's had children, and like how do you view that now?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I've learned from doing some of the other Chekhov plays in between then and now, that there's this fabulous ridiculousness about the people. He loves the people that he writes deeply and has great empathy and compassion and doesn't really write villains, which is one of the curious things about him. It's also true in his short stories. But there's something hilarious about them, and maybe I understand that a little bit better, I hope.
But I was wondering if your memory of doing the play was like you were a kid and you're like, nailed it. And now when you think about it, you're just like, I don't know, you know?
That's a good question. I thought our production was pretty successful. And of course, when you're doing those productions as a student, you're in a black box or in a classroom, sort of a big classroom. And so there's this whole other, it's not like doing it in a big theater. And there's a certain beauty to that. And I remember some of those productions, because at ACT, where I went to train, in the second year of training, everybody always did Chekhov. So every year there would be a round of Chekhov plays. And I still remember a production of Three Sisters, I guess it was another class that did it, and it was all in candlelight, the entire production, in this tiny room. And I think it's one of the best productions of it I've ever seen, because they didn't have to worry about making sure people heard them because it was a tiny space, and it was beautiful. It was very
in a way,
simple.
it's a lot like this film. Like
Yeah,
this film is
I was just
super.
going to say, it's got that intimacy that we were going for here, and a lot of candlelight.
Voila.
Right?
You are a director. I don't know why I just said that.
Michael, do you want to talk about the look you were going for the film?
Well, we knew that we wanted to be truthful to the period, and we were blessed with this amazing house and lake and all the stuff that like Chekhov writes about in the play. Our production designer Jane Muskie found in Monroe, New York. It's a funny story about it, which is that when she started looking for it, she called me and she said, you know, I remember when I was a young Russian girl that I went swimming in this lake upstate and there was a house and maybe we could find that. And I said, Jane, when were you a Russian girl? You were from Connecticut or something like. But her family is from Russia originally, and sure enough, there was this house and with a lake on it, on a lake, and it was founded by and maintained by Russian Americans, and they're actually statues of the poets, you know. There's Lermontov and Pushkin and Akhmatova, you know, all of these like Russia. It was full of Russian feeling and ghosts and stuff. So that sort of took care of a lot of it in a way. But I knew that we wanted it to be intimate, and I wanted the camera to be inside the scenes as opposed to outside the scenes, the way that you are in the theater when you do Chekhov. You're always a little bit outside of the proscenium, and it just functions differently that way. So, and Matt Lloyd, our great DP, decided to use all natural light, and that's therefore the candlelight. Well, he had these chandelier.
Wait, there's no lights at all?
He had candelabras of like these things, these like metal trays on a stick with like 12 candles on each one, and the electricians would walk around like
This sounds
holding these
so
things.
dangerous.
It was
Were you just like,
dangerous.
what is going to happen here?
That last scene, you know, with Billy, the last scene with Constantine and Nina in that little study, there was the guy, John, on camera, and these two guys holding these candles, and it was a real dance they had to do. It was kind of amazing.
Annette, I saw this quote from you. You said, the classics like Chekhov can lift us up out of our present moment and reassure us about something deeply good in human beings. Were you talking about this story?
I don't know what I'm talking about. Never mind. I don't know what I meant.
Okay.
Deeply, let's just say human. I don't know. I feel like
Okay.
even when I feel like he tries to tell the truth about human nature, and even when the truth is hard to see, I always feel better when someone tells me the truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you just saying that?
No, I
Okay.
understand it. No, it does feel better.
No, I do love that about his writing. He doesn't sugarcoat people, and yet he also loves them at the same time. But there's a lot of pain in his plays, and there's always this delicate balance between something being very funny and very sad. And that's the magic of the writing, and that's why it's difficult, and we all keep trying to do them, because we're trying to find that. Because when you see it done, you're right on the edge of both. Something can be very absurd and hilarious, and then also tragic. And that's kind of like life. So I like that about his writing very much. My college professor said there was only one villain in all of his plays, and that's, for those of you who like Chekhov, Solyony in The Three Sisters. Maybe he's a villain. But that was his opinion, and I liked my professor at San Francisco State.
You made this film sort of near to when you made 20th Century Women, Mike Mills' film. I'm a super fan of that film. Have many of you seen that film? And I feel like these two women, these two moms, are such different moms, but I wonder if playing them in proximity, anything in them reminded you of each other. Like, because both are such like weird combinations of being like, I've got it under control, and then totally vulnerable in moments.
That's fascinating. I hadn't thought about trying to compare them. They are so dissimilar. Well, when I was working on 20th Century Women, I was working so closely with Mike Mills, the director, writer, and this was not exactly his mom, but it was certainly inspired by his mom. So we ended up talking at length about everything, always. We still talk about his mother and the contradictions in her, and but I don't think that she was a narcissist.
No.
And I think it's fair to say that Irina in this movie is a narcissist. And she doesn't see herself, really. She's, for someone who is an actress, she's not really very self-reflective. But having played it, too, when I was a kid, when I approached it this time, I didn't think a lot. And that's, I don't know if that makes sense, but I felt much more free. I didn't worry about it. I didn't worry about what it was going to be. I just did it. Plus, we had to do it so quickly. There was no other way of doing it. Not really, but
Right, you had 21
no,
shoot days.
yeah. So that's a good thing when I like that feeling of feeling free. Like when you're a little kid and you're pretending, you don't really think about it. You think, am I convincing as this pirate or this frontier woman in my backyard? You're just doing it. And that, of course, as an adult, you can't ever completely do that because you would be, you have to, that you're not that person. But when you can just sort of freely go into the moments, and I felt more free because I knew it very well and I had played it before.
Michael, could you talk about like working together? Like how like what kind of things you would say before scenes and how you would scheme together? Like what or like would you just be like, okay, you know the scene, go? Like
I
how
would,
would it work?
well, no, it wasn't really like that. We were, because you were Annette was the first person on the movie. I mean, we asked her to do this before there was even a script. There was just an idea, and thank God she said yes. And so from the very beginning, from over Chinese food at your house and sushi in LA at what is Sasabune or whatever it's called, we had been talking about the character and how we would cast it and how we would make it. So I think we were very much on the same page from the very beginning. And
Were
we
there
did
certain
readings
scenes
together.
though that you were especially looking forward to? You saw as like as the pivotal scenes.
Well, I would say that what was really amazing is that on our second day of shooting, we did the big scene with Constantine.
The bandage scene.
The bandaging scene.
That scene is
That was
crazy.
your first day of work. And it was his second day in a movie ever. So that was an intense day.
Wow.
Yeah, and but because we had read it through and we sort of did some table work, and at your apartment,
Table
we
work,
had the
you
whole
read it around
cast
the table.
talking about the scenes and reading them. And we did also, you came to New York, you were in New York for a few days, and we were in the basement of the Belasco Theater where Hedwig was playing, and
Which
a
you
few of
directed.
the actors who were in town would come down, and Neil Patrick Harris would be screaming his face off upstairs, and we'd be rehearsing this Chekhov, these scenes down in the basement. It was very peculiar. It was real. We did what we could. You know, you do what you can to get this done. But I do remember the bandage scene was very tricky. We did the entire scene up to the point where he runs off into the woods, and then we did the second half of it days later. Because you can't do everything in continuity. Yeah. But I'd say the one scene we worked on the most was the big scene with Boris in the bedroom where he asks you to let him go and you convince him to stay. And that's the one that we rehearsed the night before. And we sent everyone home, and it was just you, me, Corey, Matt, and John, the Steadicam operator. And that was an amazing experience.
And why? What would you say to each other? Like how does it work? Because you see such a different side of that lady in that scene. Like she seems so like bare in that scene in a way.
Well, it's how to get from that. She's completely bereft at the beginning. She's had this incredibly challenging moment with her son. She knows that her lover is infatuated with this young girl. She's feeling her youth sort of slipping away beyond her grasp. And then he comes in, and at a very low point, he says, "Please let me go. I'm in love, maybe for the first time in my life." So from absolute sort of abject vulnerability, and you watch her, I mean, it's one of my favorite scenes you've ever done. And to watch you as Arkadina summon the inner strength and the ability to then sort of corral whatever spirit you have left, survivor spirit, to manipulate him back into being with you. I mean, it's a remarkable thing, and a lot of it is in one take. It's really amazing. But we talked about how we would navigate through that, and there were lots of different ways that we tried it. And in fact, the day that we shot it the next day, we actually chucked everything that we had worked on the night before and started fresh again. So it was kind of it was very a very exciting and dynamic experience working on that.
Do you want to say anything about it, or do you not want to say anything about it?
Well, actually, what I was thinking about when Michael was talking is how it becomes this, all of these moments, all of these scenes, when you're trying to find them, becomes this group dynamic. it was Matt, our cinematographer, who's a very feeling person, and the great cinematographers are like that. They're watching, but they're in the scene as much as you are, as is the director, clearly Michael, the way you just described it. And then the camera operator, who was on a Steadicam, which I'm sure most of you know what that is. You see those mechanisms where the camera's attached to their body and they're moving around the room with you. And he was also incredibly involved. And we all, so that's it's like when you're on a team, you know, and you work together. And so part of what's coming out of you isn't just, it's coming from the other people. And that makes a huge difference. You can't always depend on that as an actor, because sometimes sets aren't like that, but this was. And so everything seemed to flow out of that very naturally. And I remember when we were finished, John, who did the Steadicam, cried. Yeah. Like we all kind of did. Yeah. We were all like, sort of spent, like in a good way though. Yeah. You know, when you have a good cry, and it's sort of cathartic. So it becomes this, group dynamic.
Okay, do you have questions? Raise your hand, I will point and repeat your question. Yes?
By the way, I love this film. I'm just curious, what one question, if you could ask of Chekhov, would each of you ask?
That is such a good question. And what a stumper. I'm just going to talk for a second while they collect their thoughts. Excellent question, whoever you are.
I know that I felt when I read about him, especially this last, when we were working on this and I was reading this more recent biography of him, I had a crush on him. But I mean that really seriously. I really did. And in this one, there was a lot of talk about I think he had a lot of lovers. I mean, he was in love with and married the leading actress of the Moscow Art Theater. And they had a very tempestuous relationship, but a very close one. And she was with him when he died. He died young of tuberculosis. But he was very handsome. And he was a short story, he had become famous as a short story writer first, and he was a physician. He needed to augment his income because his entire family depended on him for money. So let's see, what would I ask him?
Because of socialized medicine or something. No, I don't know. Okay, yeah. And so, yeah, what would you ask him?
Would you like to go have a glass of wine with me? That's pretty good.
Michael?
That's a good one. I guess pertaining to the Seagull, I might ask him, if he believes that Constantine had talent.
Oh, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. I love that. The other thing I would ask him is, what did you really think of Stanislavski?
Okay, yes, in the back over there. You, ma'am?
I have a question for Annette. I was just going to ask, at the end of the movie, after Constantine has shot himself, it was very different than other productions I've seen on stage in that I felt like your character almost knew something, and I've kind of never seen it interpreted like that. And I wanted to know kind of what was going through your mind, what was maybe going through the character's mind after you hear that gunshot at the end.
Thank you for your question. In the play, there is a moment that he's written after that. So in the play, you hear the gunshot, and of course, everyone knows what it is in the audience. And then the doctor...
It's the same little lines about like, the doctor says, "Oh, Boris, come." He says, "Yes, something exploded." That he leaves and says, "Something exploded in my medicine bag. Nothing to worry about." And then he says, "Boris, would you," in an uncharacteristic moment, says, "Boris, would you come here and talk to me about this? I want to show you something interesting in this magazine." And then they actually go to the other side of the stage And then the famous last line is, "Get Irina Arkadina out of here, because the truth is Konstantin Gavrilovich has shot himself." And then the curtain falls, right?
Right. That's normally the ending.
So their understanding is that she's bought the line about the explosion in the medicine bag.
And did you feel like she bought it or not in your performance here, or do you not want to say?
I guess I don't really want to say.
That's good. Okay. Yeah. Good.
I like that answer.
Yeah,
too.
that's a good answer. Yeah, no, that was the question from the lady. Yeah.
I'm
just-
sorry.
Yeah. Okay, one last question.
Sorry, say that
She's
again.
saying you're coming right at the beginning of the big scene with Boris. You're coming right out of the scene with Konstantin, and you say to him, well, you know you have to go back to Moscow, and you know why. Yes? And her reaction was she also knew you had to leave to save Konstantin. Let me just repeat what you're saying. And so she's saying, like at the beginning, you're thinking about Konstantin, and she's saying it seemed like that changes what you're thinking about over the course of the scene. And your question is just how does Annette see what was happening? in the
Okay,
scene?
let's see. Yes, I mean, I think that part of it is, it's both. It's both. It's a contradiction, but it's not really an entire contradiction. It's just two different things that are happening at the same time, which is very much like how life happens. Even in the most in most moments, nothing is just unidetermined in terms of why we're doing what we do. It's usually a mixture of motives. And I do think that she genuinely does want to protect her son from the pain that he's in, that he's losing this girl. And I think the idea of losing her lover to this girl is also devastating for her. So I do think it's both. And where one dominates the other, I don't know that I would, could articulate, and probably would seem different to different people watching the scene.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming out. I just want to say, although the film is full of incredible actors, it's kind of like it's still kind of an indie movie, and so the advertising budget isn't the hugest. And so if you have social media, if you could take a picture of the three of us sitting on stage right now, and if you like the movie, post it on Twitter or on your Facebook, and tell people how much you liked the movie. Put it on Insta. We will sit here all prettily
Thank you,
for you.
Ira.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
You're so
let people
great.
know. And thanks so much for coming out. Annette Bening, Michael Mayer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.